Could an urban revolt in the heart of the capital have toppled the Umayyads? I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in episode 31, I will explore the turbulent reigns of Hisham and al-Hakam I of Córdoba, two emirs who face family conspiracies and uprisings that threatened the very survival of an independent Umayyad Emirate in al-Andalus. Hisham I of Córdoba, the Emir of Jihad. First of all, if you are listening by a podcast, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content, like the story of 3 Palestinian Arabs who participated in the Spanish Civil War. And if you would like me to keep talking about history, please consider joining the community of supporters at patreon.com/newhistoryspain, as Anna Marie Fatherson has done. Thank you very much, Anna Marie. Picking up the Umayyad narrative from episode 27, Abdel-Rahman I, the refugee who seized al-Andalus, we must note that the architect of the independent Umayyad Emirate in al-Andalus died in October 788, leaving the throne to his son Hisham. Hisham was born of a relationship with a Cordoban woman whom Abdel-Rahman had taken as a concubine shortly after entering the capital in 756. At the time of his father's death, Hisham was serving as governor of Mérida, having previously governed Toledo. Upon hearing the news, he rushed to the capital to seize control of the Alcázar, the castle and palace that symbolized Umayyad sovereignty. However, his succession was contested. The eldest son, Suleiman, attempted to usurp the throne with the support of his brother Abdallah. Suleiman, then governor of Toledo, rallied Syrian Arab allies and clashed with Hisham in the province of Jaén, where he was defeated. The resistance continued. Hisham laid siege to Toledo, defended by Abdallah, but failed to capture it. Eventually, Abdallah surrendered and sought the emir's pardon. Suleiman, realizing the rebellion was failing, negotiated with Hisham. Hisham agreed to a financial settlement of around 60,000 dinars, a substantial amount given the annual revenue of the central Cordoban authority at the time. But the emir forced his brothers and their families into exile in the Maghreb. During his brief reign, Hisham also faced other uprisings, including a local revolt involving many Berbers from the mountains near Malaga, and refusals to recognize Umayyad authority by the governors of Barcelona and Zaragoza. These latter revolts were suppressed thanks to local Mu'allat allies who acted in Hisham's name, hoping to be rewarded for their loyalty. Among these Muslims of native origin were Amrus ibn Yusuf and Musa ibn Fortun of the Banu Qasi family. Yet these challenges were not enough to prevent a devout believer like Hisham from launching jihad campaigns against the Christian territories in northern and northeastern Iberia, motivated by the rising threat posed by shifts in the peninsula's balance of power. From the Islamic perspective, the entire peninsula had been conquered, and a Christian prince in the north was seen as no less rebellious than Arabs, Berbers, or Mu'allats who refused to obey Umayyad authority or pay tribute. In the ideology of jihad, Christians could only be left in peace if they converted to Islam or paid tribute as dhimmis, non-Muslims living under Islamic rule. As discussed in episode 28, the Kingdom of Asturias from Alfonso I to Bermudo, in 791 Hisham launched dual raids against both flanks of the Kingdom of Asturias, Álava and Galicia. Both campaigns were victorious, resulting in Christian defeats and the abdication of King Bermudo the Deacon in favor of Alfonso II of Asturias, son of King Fruela. In 793, Umayyad troops launched a renowned campaign against Girona and Narbonne. Although these cities were not recaptured, it was a military success. They defeated the Count of Toulouse and seized large amounts of booty in gold, goods, and slaves. Among other things, the fifth of the loot collected by the state helped fund repairs to the Roman bridge of Córdoba and continued construction on the Great Mosque of Córdoba. In 794, the Ibn brothers led another campaign, this time with less luck. Although one army looted the small city of Oviedo, they were ambushed on the return at the Battle of Lutos, resulting in an Asturian victory and heavy Muslim casualties. Despite their numerical and economic inferiority, the Asturians made up for it through the rugged terrain, familiarity with the land, and guerrilla tactics like closing off mountain passes, setting ambushes, and avoiding open field battles. The following year, the Muslims fared better, striking Álava and Castile, and again advancing on Oviedo. Though they killed many in battle, they failed to decisively defeat or capture Alfonso II. The aim of these raids during the emiral era was to cause destruction, seize booty, and disrupt Christian territorial advances, primarily by mobilizing frontier troops. It was a strategy of containment, since the central government lacked the strength to launch sieges or colonize new lands, unlike during the earlier Great Arab conquests. Hisham's brutal campaigns likely convinced the elites of Asturias of the need to build fortresses, still made of wood most of the time, providing shelter for civilians, livestock, and crops. This is how the old region of Bardulia in northern Burgos gradually earned the name Castile. Perhaps more importantly, war against infidels served domestic purposes as well. It helped pacify rebellious borderlands, win favor among Orthodox Islamic factions, enrich the Umayyads and their soldiers, and keep military forces too busy to turn their strength against Córdoba. It's possible that Hisham genuinely hoped to wipe out the Kingdom of Asturias by attacking Oviedo directly and trying to capture Alfonso II. But his successors will not be so ambitious. The campaigns of the Emirate of Córdoba led not only to the deaths of soldiers, but also civilians, the enslavement of Christians, and the destruction of churches, monasteries, crops, and homes, threatening the very survival of those affected. At this stage, the Christians in the north were mostly on the defensive, so the Muslim forces had the upper hand in destruction. However, Asturian offensives could also be just as devastating. This wasn't a tale of good guys versus bad guys. Beyond warfare, Emir Hisham, always committed to being an exemplary Muslim, aligned himself with the legal doctrines taught in Medina by theologian and jurist Malik ibn Anas, founder of the Maliki school of Sunni Islamic law. The four classical schools of Sunni jurisprudence differ in how they prioritize sources and methods of legal reasoning. The Maliki school is known for its orthodoxy and its restrictive approach, relying mainly on the Quran, the most respected hadiths, and the customary law of Medina, leaving little room for innovation, speculation, or ambiguity. Some Andalusi jurists studied under Malik ibn Anas and returned home with his teachings. During the first half of the 9th century, they made Malikism the dominant school of law in al-Andalus, effectively turning it into the official legal doctrine until the fall of al-Andalus. The Umayyads' embrace of Malikism bolstered their legitimacy as defenders of Islamic orthodoxy, especially in contrast to the theological innovations of rival dynasties like the Abbasids. It also helped them avoid the internal divisions and chaos that plagued Baghdad during the proliferation of various Islamic schools. Lastly, the final noteworthy act of Hisham's emirate was his effort to prevent a succession crisis like the one he experienced. He imprisoned his eldest son and named his 26-year-old son, al-Hakam, as his heir. Before reaching the age of 40, Emir Hisham I of Córdoba died in mid-796. Alfonso II of Asturias, the king in the north. Alfonso II of Asturias began his reign in the year 791, following the Asturian disaster against Hisham. Although he ruled for a long 50 years from 791 to 842, there are many gaps in the historical record of Alfonso II's lengthy reign. For example, in either 801 or 802, he was deposed and forced to enter a monastery in Asturias by an unnamed member of the royal dynasty, according to the chronicles. However, not long after, the usurper was assassinated and Alfonso returned to power. Even earlier, when he was expected to succeed Silo, the throne was taken by Mauregatus, and Alfonso's rights were overlooked in the successions of both Silo and Mauregatus. It's clear that Alfonso II was unpopular with a significant portion of the royal family and the kingdom's nobility, perhaps connected to those involved in the assassination of King Cruella or because of Alfonso's relationship with Charlemagne's court. Alfonso II earned the nickname the Chaste because, as far as we know, he never married or had children, which was quite unusual. This may have been because he was forced to take monastic vows during his brief deposition, or perhaps as a condition for being accepted as king, he had to renounce having descendants. During Alfonso II's reign, the administrative structures of the Kingdom of Asturias were developed. The political leadership evolved into a proper, albeit small, kingdom with the establishment of institutions such as the royal chancellery. Alfonso II transformed Oviedo into the royal seat, expanding and embellishing it with numerous churches, basilicas, and palaces. Until then, Oviedo had been little more than a village, so he had established a new diocese there to strengthen the connection between royal and ecclesiastical power. Some historians see Alfonso II as displaying the first signs of Neo-Gothicism, the ideology and propaganda that claims that the kingdom is a successor and restorer of the Visigothic kingdom, but contemporary documents only support the idea that this monarchy aimed to restore Christianity throughout the entire Iberian Peninsula. More than trying to emulate the Visigothic kingdom, Alfonso II likely sought to model himself after the dominant Christian power of the time, the Carolingian Empire, with the appeal to Gothic legitimacy coming later, once the Carolingians were in decline. Speaking of the Carolingian Empire, the almost yearly military raids sent by Emir Hisham I of Córdoba were a good reason to strengthen diplomatic ties between the small kingdom and Charlemagne. There had already been an initial approach when Alfonso II supported monk Beatus of Liébana in aligning with the Carolingian stance against adoptionism, eliminating heresy from the kingdom's church and breaking away from the weakening authority of the Primate of Hispania, the Archbishopric of Toledo, which was under Andalusi control. In 795, an Asturian embassy arrived at the court of Louis the Pious in Toulouse to seal an alliance, and in 797 another was sent to Charlemagne's court bearing a captured tent belonging to General Abdelkarim ibn Mughith. The following year, the Asturian sovereign sent a final embassy with 7 captured Andalusi prisoners, as well as horses and weapons taken during the sack of Lisbon. That's right, aware of the Emirate of Córdoba's political instability in 798, the Asturians went on the offensive and raided a city as far south as Lisbon. In his correspondence, Alfonso the Chase cheerfully declared himself a servant of Charlemagne, sometimes mistranslated as vassal, but this should not be interpreted as implying actual subordination, as if he was taking orders or paying tribute. Rather, it most likely signified Alfonso's recognition of Charlemagne as a superior authority within Christendom. Alfonso II continued the efforts of his predecessors to assert effective control over the peripheral areas of the kingdom and prevent the emergence of rival powers. As we've seen in previous episodes, the Douro River Basin presented a decentralized and diverse political landscape, but the same could be said of parts of Galicia and Vasconia, which the Asturian kingdom sought to integrate with difficulty. Resistance to royal authority persisted, even as the monarchy pursued political alliances and marriage arrangements between local elites and the Asturian royal family. This was due in part to the unclear benefits of surrendering sovereignty to the Asturian monarchs, and in part to the heterogeneity of power structures and socio-economic systems in the regions they sought to incorporate, from elite-less valleys in Biscay to the hill forts, monasteries, and relatively large landowners of Galicia. Just as the Cordovan emirs struggled to exercise authority across the entire Iberian Peninsula, the Asturian kings faced great difficulty in consolidating power in the kingdom's outer regions. Maps cannot do justice to the complexity of an early medieval monarchy. While regions like Liébana, Central and Eastern Asturias, and Álava had strong ties to Alfonso II's court, others, such as Trasmiera in Cantabria or even parts of Asturias, remained poorly connected to central authority. Support from one region or another could be crucial to gaining or holding the throne. For instance, because Alfonso II's mother was a woman from Álava, he enjoyed backing in Vasconia. In contrast, King Ramiro I secured power thanks to a Galician army with which he deposed Alfonso II's successor, his brother-in-law Nepotian. There was no unified Christian resistance or sense of collective identity, despite what Asturian chronicles or later national Catholic Reconquista narratives might suggest. Al-Hakam I, a ruthless emir. Al-Hakam was a very different man from his father. He wasn't particularly concerned with theology or being a good Muslim. In fact, he drank wine and enjoyed spending time with his concubines or hunting, as some religious men criticized. He wrote poetry, was tall, and bore the features of a pure-blooded Arab, and is remembered, above all, for swiftly and ruthlessly nipping problems in the bud. While the credit for being a patron of poets and artists is often given to his son Abdelrahman II, it was Emir al-Hakam I who laid the groundwork for promoting Eastern Cowrie culture and even invited the famous Iraqi poet, musician, and courtier Ziryab to Córdoba before his death. As soon as he took the throne, al-Hakam I had to face both internal and external challenges, starting with renewed claims to the throne from his uncles Suleiman and Abdallah, who returned from the Maghreb. Suleiman didn't garner much support, just a few Berbers and Yaman Arabs from Valencia and the Ebro Valley. And after 4 years of defeats in Andalusia, he was executed by the governor of Mérida, and his head was sent and displayed in Córdoba. He was buried in the Umayyad pantheon alongside his father, since Suleiman may have been a traitor, but he was still a member of the Umayyad family. Abdallah, for his part, sought help from Charlemagne, as discussed in episode 29, Charlemagne in Spain, and occupied Huesca with a Frankish army before being ousted by a rebel Mu'allad. Ultimately, Abdallah struck a deal with his nephew. He will renounce his claims and swear loyalty in exchange for an annual stipend and a lifelong lordship over Valencia, a relatively insignificant city at the time where the Umayyads had little control anyway. During al-Hakam's rule, Abdallah al-Balansi honored the agreement, led expeditions against Frankish-held Barcelona, and one of his sons served as a loyal advisor at the Cordoban court. Emir al-Hakam's effective authority was largely confined to what's now Andalusia and Murcia. He could do little to stop the Carolingian interventions of the 790s and 800s, or to continue attacking the Kingdom of Asturias as his father had. Like many other emirs, he was hamstrung by the structural difficulty of building a strong central state, which meant some Christian raids and territorial gains went unanswered. Early in his reign, al-Hakam did launch a razzia into the north that subdued Calahorra, crossed the Castilian lands to the Cantabrian coast, and returned to Córdoba with a handsome booty. In 801, 803, and 808, he sent other expeditions against Álava, Castile, and Galicia, though these campaigns were limited in scale and success. While he couldn't prevent the fall of Barcelona in the northeast, Córdoba's intervention did stop Tortosa from falling into Frankish hands. A more serious campaign came in 816, when he attacked Vasconia, specifically Carolingian-held Pamplona, while Álava and Biscay were under Oviedo's influence. This campaign ended in a Muslim victory and marked a serious blow to Alfonso II's expansion into Vasconia. Among the Christian casualties was a maternal uncle of the Asturian king, a key figure in asserting Asturian control over Vasconic lands. This 816 campaign was al-Hakam's last military expedition against Christian-controlled territory. His main challenge lay within al-Andalus itself, consolidating Umayyad authority through blood and fire. Until the early 9th century, Andalusi society had not changed drastically from Visigothic times, but after that, the transformation toward an Islamized Arabic culture accelerated. Under al-Hakam, it became increasingly common to found mosques and almunias, rural estates belonging to urban elites. For example, one of his concubines sponsored a mosque that led to the growth of a new suburb, and another established an almunia, mosque, and leper hospital west of Córdoba. Some changes sparked resistance. One major grievance was the establishment of a fixed tithe on cereal crops, regardless of harvest size or religious affiliation. As had happened in the Abbasid Caliphate, improving public finances meant ending Muslim tax privileges. That party crusher in al-Andalus was al-Hakam. Another source of unrest was the expansion of the Umayyad personal guard, popularly known as the Mutes, because they didn't speak Arabic. Led by the powerful Arabized Christian Rabbi Ibn Tedulf, and composed of Sakaliba, slaves from northern Spain and other parts of Europe, they were charged with internal repression and tax collection, making them widely despised. The third Umayyad Emir managed to anger fellow Umayyads, border lords, Muslims, dhimmis, and even Maliki juries who longed for his father's asceticism and saw al-Hakam's policies as tyrannical and ungodly. Even his eldest son tried to assassinate him to take the throne. With an iron fist, a spy network, and a permanent slave army, al-Hakam ruthlessly crushed dissent, sometimes taking measures so harsh that he gained a lasting reputation as a brutal and repressive ruler. But al-Hakam didn't govern poorly. He did the dirty work of building a state with a stronger fiscal foundations, though his son and successor, Abdulrahman II, will later receive most of the credit for what statists consider an achievement. As we will see later, opposition in Córdoba was repressed, but the frontier marches were a different story. It was much harder to compel them to pay regular tribute to the Umayyads. In the lower march, based in Mérida, al-Hakam spent years trying to quell the rebellion of the Berber who had executed Suleiman. His family defied Umayyad rule from 805 to 812 before a deal was reached, though a fresh uprising broke out in 817 and had to be suppressed by the crown prince. Lisbon and Coimbra stopped paying tribute, prompting al-Hakam to send his son to pacify the area. The Muwallad Amrus ibn Yusuf was tasked with suppressing opposition in Toledo, the old Visigothic capital, which had refused to recognize the emir's appointed governor. As governor of the nearby town of Talavera, Amrus knew he couldn't take Toledo's walls by force. So he promised one rebel family that he would appoint one of their own as governor if they killed the revolt's leader. They did, delivered his head, and were promptly killed by Talavera's Berbers in revenge. Amrus gained the trust of Toledo's major Muwallad and Christian families by claiming he also disliked the Arabs and the Umayyad dynasty. The city gates were open to him, and he fortified a citadel inside with the excuse of separating Umayyad troops from the local civilian population. Amrus later informed Toledo's residents that Prince Abd al-Rahman would be visiting under the pretense of an attack in the upper march. He held a banquet for the city's elites, which, according to Arab chronicles, was a trap. Each guest was taken through a hallway and silently executed, their bodies dumped into a pit dug for the occasion. This massacre is known as the Day of the Moat. The last few guests realized what was happening and fled. Some chronicles claim Prince Abd al-Rahman was so traumatized by the event that he suffered from involuntary eye twitches for the rest of his life, though some historians question whether the Day of the Moat ever really happened, noting similar stories in other historical contexts. For more than a decade afterward, there were no new revolts in Toledo, so if the bloody banquet did happen, it clearly worked. In the upper march, Amrus ibn Yusuf drove the rebel Balul ibn Marzouk out of Zaragoza, restoring Umayyad control. As governor of the entire upper march, he fortified Tudela, elevating it to an important Andalusi city, and sent his cousin to govern Huesca. Even more significant was Amrus' conflict with the Banu Qasi and their Vasconic allies in Pamplona, as well as allies in the Upper Aragon, Álava, Castile, and Amaya, a former stronghold in what is now Burgos, not yet part of the Asturian kingdom. The Banu Qasi broke ties with the Emir, captured Tudela, and took Amrus' son hostage, but were eventually defeated. For a decade, the Banu Amrus dominated the upper march. Amrus ibn Yusuf grew so powerful and autonomous that he even approached the court of Louis the Pious. Emir al-Hakam had to diplomatically bring him back into the Umayyad fold, carefully, so as not to lose his most valuable frontier ally. The Revolt of the Suburb of Saqunda. It was during the reign of al-Hakam that one of the most significant and memorable events in the history of the Emirate of Córdoba took place: the Revolt of the Suburb of Saqunda, a neighborhood of the capital located on the southern bank of the Guadalquivir River, connected to the rest of Córdoba by the Roman bridge. Córdoba had undergone many urban transformations since transitioning from a late antique city to the capital of al-Andalus. The city expanded alongside economic and demographic growth and the increasing consolidation of Umayyad power. The primary area of urban expansion beyond the city walls during the 8th century was across the river, due to its proximity to the Great Mosque and the Umayyad Alcázar. It was there that the suburb of Saqunda developed, eventually engulfing the Roman villa of Secunda and extending as far south as the modern-day San Rafael Bridge, beyond the Roman bridge. Contrary to the extended myth of medieval Islamic urbanism as a chaotic maze of narrow alleys, the suburb of Saqunda displayed a degree of urban planning with an orthogonal layout of rectangular streets, secondary roads, and plazas, where public wells were located to supply water to the population, as wells had not yet been privatized within individual household courtyards. Saqunda housed olive presses for oil production, workshops producing Córdoba's famous leather, metalworking shops for making weapons and all kinds of metal objects, as well as shops and residential homes. As a newly developed neighborhood in the rapidly expanding and dynamic city of Córdoba, Saqunda was home to a diverse population. Residents included Islamic jurists, courtiers, merchants, artisans, and people of different faiths, Muslims, Christians, and Jews. The population is estimated to have been between 20,000 and 30,000. What is especially striking is the early and intense Islamization and Arabization of this area, which can be explained by its location in the capital and thus its close ties to the ruling power. This is evidenced by the absence of pig remains, ceramics inscribed with Quranic verses in Arabic, and the use of sheep scapulae as writing tablets for learning the Arabic language. Setting aside Saqunda for a moment, there was widespread discontent across al-Andalus over Emir al-Hakam I's fiscal policies, which imposed higher taxes against Quranic principles. Outside the capital, resistance was more viable since cities could simply stop paying taxes and be labeled as rebellious by the Umayyads, thanks to their distance from Córdoba and the local control of fiscal and military resources. But in the capital, there was no way to avoid tax burdens, and discontent was growing due to increased taxation, inflation, and abuses by the emir's guard. All sectors of society voiced criticism, and some Maliki jurists, such as the Berber Yahya ibn Yahya, leveraged the public respect to portray al-Hakam as a despot who had strayed from God's path, inciting rebellion. As early as the year 805, several Arab nobles from Córdoba conspired to overthrow the emir and replace him with his cousin. Unfortunately for the plotters, the cousin remained loyal and revealed the conspiracy, resulting in the public crucifixion of 72 conspirators, including a jurist and Córdoba's inspector of the market, to the horror of the population. The emir bolstered his security with more guards, fortified the palace and the city, and executed two of his uncles who had been imprisoned since the reign of Emir Hisham. The following year, while the emir was besieging Mérida, a group of merchants in Córdoba staged an armed protest against a decision by the market inspector, whom they threatened to kill. Upon hearing the news, al-Hakam promptly returned to the capital and executed several involved merchants. Though it might seem like a minor local incident, this episode reflected widespread discontent and revealed a climate of unrest in Córdoba. All that was needed was a spark to ignite a full-blown uprising, and that spark came in March of 818, when a slave soldier of al-Hakam murdered a blacksmith in the Saqunda market, thinking he will face no consequences. The residents of Saqunda, joined by people from other neighborhoods, rose in solidarity, took up arms, and marched toward the Umayyad castle and palace. The situation became critical as thousands of people joined the revolt by the hour. Though the emir's slaves and clients had so far remained loyal, there was a real risk they would break ranks if things worsened. Fortunately for the emir, two of his cousins, including a son of Abdallah al-Balansi, came to his aid. They led cavalry units to flank the rebels, launching a surprise attack near the Alcázar and the Roman Bridge. The emir's loyalists crashed the uprising and spent the next 3 days destroying the suburb of Saqunda, capturing and killing more rebels and civilians. Accounts vary regarding whether al-Hakam ordered the women and children to be spared and moved to safety during the crackdown. More critical sources suggest that no such mercy was shown, and that anyone associated with the revolt, regardless of age or gender, was killed or enslaved. On the 4th day, the emir halted the indiscriminate killings and crucified 300 captured rebels. He ordered the complete dismantling of the suburb of Saqunda, which remained a residential wasteland until the Christian conquest. Nevertheless, the area still saw some use due to its proximity to the city center. A few homes of loyal officials remain. Ambassadors from Constantinople were accommodated there, and we have records of rural estates in the area. The land was primarily used for gardens, cemeteries, and military camps. Acting on the advice of the general and chamberlain al-Hakam ibn Mughith, the fearsome emir offered a token gesture of mercy, granting pardon to the surviving residents of Saqunda and other Cordobans who had joined the revolt, but only on the condition that they leave Córdoba. This forced exile affected thousands, perhaps over 20,000 people. He was somewhat more lenient with the Maliki juries who had played a key role in the uprising. As elite figures respected in society, it was more pragmatic to win them over for religious legitimacy than to punish them. A group of exiles took refuge in rebellious Toledo, but more resettled in what is now Morocco, particularly in the newly founded city of Fez. There, Arab Prince Idris II welcomed them, eager to reduce Berber influence and benefit from the more Arabized and urban Andalusi culture. Over time, many refugees were able to return to al-Andalus, but they were required to swear new oaths of loyalty and live under harsher conditions. What is most fascinating is that several thousand Cordoban exiles eventually reached Egypt and managed to occupy Alexandria militarily for several years until they were forced to leave in 827. These exiles, along with others who had joined them along the way, seized the strategically vital island of Crete from the Byzantine Empire. Thus was founded the Emirate of Crete. The settlers cultivated the land and used the island as a naval base to launch pirate raids along the Greek coast. This emirate sparked diplomatic exchanges between the Emirate of Córdoba and Byzantium, as the emperor demanded the emir help him expel the Andalusi pirates. But little came of these efforts, and it wasn't until 961 that the Greeks managed to reconquer Crete. From a Sunni perspective, a bad ruler is preferable to social unrest, and so the ends justified the repressive means used to defend and consolidate Umayyad authority. The revolt of the Suburb is so significant precisely because it occurred in Córdoba itself, the very seat of Umayyad power, and posed a serious threat to the dynasty's continuity through a popular uprising. The regime's will to survive triumphed completely, and from then on until the fall of the Caliphate of Córdoba, the people of the city remained under Umayyad iron rule. The next challenge was to bring the borderlands under lasting control and to halt and reverse Christian territorial advances, something only partially achieved in the 10th century. According to some chronicles, shortly after the revolt, al-Hakam fell ill and spent the last 4 years of his life repenting for his sins and the events in Saqunda, seeking God's forgiveness. The person who most epitomized repression and fiscal extortion under al-Hakam was Rabbi Ibn Theodulf, the Christian count and head of the Emir Guard, who also amassed great personal wealth through his positions. His power angered Muslims, and his greed and corruption made him deeply unpopular across all communities. As the public face of the crackdown, he became the perfect scapegoat. Just days before ascending to the throne, al-Hakam's son Abdul-Rahman, with the approval of his dying father, had him crucified, both to absolve al-Hakam and to boost his own popularity. Indeed, before his death, al-Hakam wanted to ensure there would be no succession crises like the ones he and his father Hisham had experienced. He named Abdul-Rahman II as his heir and appointed another son as a backup successor, requiring the notables of Córdoba to swear loyalty to them both. On his deathbed in 822, al-Hakam left this message for his son, quote, "My son, I leave you my kingdom at peace, like a bed on which you may sleep soundly, for I took care to ensure that no rebel may rise to disturb your slumber." End quote. Al-Hakam laid the groundwork for a stronger emirate, and it was his son, Abdul-Rahman II, who reaped the benefits of the seeds his father had sown. The verdict. In today's verdict, I want to highlight that both the emirs of Córdoba and the kings of Asturias faced similar challenges in the 9th century when it came to asserting their authority over the territories they claimed to rule. After the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate, centralized state structures across the Iberian Peninsula weakened significantly. One of the clearest examples of this is the Douro Basin, which I've discussed in previous episodes. But it wasn't just there. We also see how the authority of the emirs of Córdoba was not easily accepted in the provinces, where local leaders had grown too used to the benefits of not having to pay tribute to a capital or be held accountable to anyone. The same thing was happening in Galicia, Álava, and Biscay, where the Asturian kings and their aristocracy sought to expand using a political model that served as an alternative to Córdoba's. After all, why would distant provinces obey the authority of Córdoba or Oviedo? What benefits could the ruling elites possibly gain? No one gives up their autonomy without resistance, and in the early Middle Ages, political entities simply didn't have enough resources to maintain a permanent occupation army to ensure loyalty. Provinces were also quite diverse in character. For example, we don't hear much about major revolts in Andalusia outside the capital during the reigns of Hisham and al-Hakam, because the Umayyads could actually assert their rule there, thanks to their proximity and the strong presence of Arab settlements, including the Syrian junts or military contingents. But that wasn't the case in the frontier regions, where the constant state of warfare with Christians, or even the possibility of alliances with them, created very different dynamics than those found farther south. That's why throughout the entire period of the Emirate of Córdoba, hardly any tribute made it from those frontier provinces. Beyond providing military support for the occasional raid, Córdoba had little to offer these regions and couldn't consistently extract their resources through force. As we'll see in upcoming episodes, early medieval Iberia was marked by political fragmentation, and both emirs and kings had to strike the right balance between the threat of force and negotiation to maintain and expand their authority. And with that, the verdict ends. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you would like to support me, consider joining the New History of Spain community on Patreon at patreon.com/newhistoryspain. You will get exclusive perks like early access to all my content, your name in the credits, shoutouts in episodes, or exclusive merch. You can also support me with a donation, links are in the description. In the next episode, I will talk about the birth of the Kingdom of Pamplona under Íñigo Arista, the Banu Qasi, and the Carolingian Empire and Spanish March after Charlemagne's death. Follow me so you don't miss it, and see you soon!